I'd love to hear more about that. What made you interested in it? Tell me more about it. You must fill me in. Wow, what happened next? That's fascinating. Go on. I'm really curious. Can you explain that a bit more? That sounds incredible. I'd love to hear the full story. No way. How did that all unfold? Really? What was that experience like for you? I can't imagine. How did you handle it? That's so interesting. What led you to that decision? Wait, back up a second. I need more details. Seriously? Tell me everything. I can see why that's so important to you. What happened after that? That's amazing. How did you feel in that moment? I want to make sure I understand. Can you expand on that? That must have been such a big deal for you. How did it affect you? Go on, I'm all ears. That's a perspective I haven't heard before. Tell me more. I love hearing stories like this. How did you end up in that situation? Oh wow, I didn't expect that. What did you do next? That's a huge moment. What was going through your mind? How did that impact the way you see things now? What an experience. Do you think it changed you? You're making me curious. What else happened? I feel like there's more to this. What else can you share? Hold on. That's a major moment. Can you break it down for me? I really appreciate you sharing this. What's the biggest takeaway for you? That's incredible. Did anything unexpected happen along the way? That must have been intense. How did you process it all? I can tell this means a lot to you. What made it so special? That's such a unique experience. Have you ever had a similar moment? You've got me hooked. What's the next part of the story? That must have been such a turning point. How did it shape you? This is so fascinating. Do you think it changed your perspective on things? Oh wow, that must have been unforgettable. What do you remember most? This is so intriguing. What else stands out to you? How did that moment compare to what you expected? I feel like there's more to this. What's the deeper story? That must have taken a lot out of you. How did you recover from it? That's wild. Did you ever think it would turn out that way? It sounds like a real roller coaster. What was the hardest part? I can't get over that. What do you think was the biggest lesson? So interesting. Did this experience change the way you approach things now? I need more details. What was the exact moment that changed everything? How did you make sense of all of that? That's such a cool experience. Do you think it shaped who you are today? I bet that was a moment you'll never forget. What stood out the most? That's so unexpected. What do you think made it turn out that way? I feel like I can almost picture it. What was going through your mind? I can imagine that was a lot to process. How did it sink in? That's huge. What was the biggest challenge? I had no idea. How did you even get started with that? That must have been a whirlwind. What helped you navigate it? I can see how much this means to you. What's your biggest takeaway? That's such a great insight. How did you come to realize that? You've got my full attention. What was the most surprising part? What a journey. Looking back, would you have done anything differently? I bet that felt like a defining moment. What was the biggest lesson? That sounds life-changing. What do you think made it so special? This is so eye-opening. Has it changed the way you see things now? That sounds so powerful. Did you expect it to affect you this much? You've really given me something to think about. How do you feel about it now? This must have been such a defining moment. How has it shaped your path? I can't believe that happened. How did you even react in the moment? That's so inspiring. What kept you going through all of it? I love hearing this. What's the most important lesson you took away? That must have been surreal. How did you process everything afterward? That really puts things into perspective. What do you think made it so meaningful? That's something I hadn't thought about before. What shaped your view on it? How do you think this experience shaped your outlook on life? I can't believe that. Was there a specific moment where everything clicked? You've really got me thinking. How do you apply this lesson in your life now? That's such a compelling story. What's the most memorable part for you? It's incredible how much this impacted you. What's one thing you'll never forget? I love your perspective on this. What made you see it this way? That must have been eye-opening. What was the most shocking part? Wow, that's a lot to take in. How did you process it all at the time? That must have been a moment of realization. What changed for you after that? I can really see how much this meant to you. What was the most emotional part? You've given me a whole new way to think about this. Where did you first learn about it? I'm genuinely fascinated. How do you think this will affect your future? That sounds like an experience that really shaped you. What would you say is the key takeaway? That's a perspective I hadn't considered before. What led you to this view? It sounds like there was a big shift for you. When did you realize it? I can tell this really resonated with you. Why do you think it made such a big impact? That must have been a profound experience. What do you think made it so powerful? Wow, that's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. What's the one thing you'll always remember? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. How did you personally interpret it? That must have changed your perspective a lot. How do you look at things differently now? What a powerful story. What do you think was the real turning point? That's such an insightful way to look at it. Where did that mindset come from? I can tell this was meaningful to you. How do you think it's shaped your choices since then? Wow, what an experience. If you had to sum it up in one lesson, what would it be? That must have been such an intense moment. How did it feel in real time? That's really something. If you could go back and relive it, would you change anything? This has been so eye-opening. What's one takeaway you hope others can learn from this? That's an incredible journey. How do you think it's changed the way you see the world? I can't believe that. What was going through your mind at that moment? That's amazing. How did it feel when it finally happened? I need more details. What happened right after that? Wow, that must have been intense. How did you handle it? I love how you're telling this. What else happened that stood out? That sounds life-changing. How do you think it shaped your future? I can tell this meant a lot to you. What was the biggest takeaway? This is so interesting. If you could go back, would you do anything differently? How did that moment compare to what you expected? I'd love to hear more about how that unfolded. What was the most surprising part? I can't even imagine. What was the hardest part about it? That must have been an unforgettable experience. What still sticks with you the most? You've got me completely hooked. What happened after that? That must have been a huge moment. How did it change your perspective? What an experience. What's something you learned that you didn't expect? Wow, I would have never thought of that. What made you see it this way? I feel like there's more to this story. What else can you share? That's incredible. What was the moment when everything really clicked? This is really eye-opening. How do you apply this lesson in your life now? That's so powerful. Do you think you would have reacted differently a few years ago? I love hearing your perspective on this. Where do you think that came from? That's so unexpected. What do you think made it turn out that way? I can really see how much this meant to you. What's one thing you'll never forget about it? I bet that was a defining moment for you. What was the biggest realization? That's an amazing story. What do you think made it such a turning point? I can tell you've thought about this a lot. What's one thing you wish you knew before? How do you think this moment shaped the person you are today? That's such a deep insight. What made you start thinking about it this way? This is so interesting. Has it influenced the way you make decisions now? Wow, that must have been surreal. What did it feel like in real time? That's such an incredible story. If you had to sum up the lesson in one sentence, what would it be? I love the way you explain this. What made it stand out so much for you? That must have been an emotional experience. What was the most meaningful part? It sounds like this moment had a huge impact on you. How do you look back on it now? That's such a cool perspective. Did anyone else see it the same way you did? I can tell this was something really big for you. What's your main takeaway from it? This really changed things for you, didn't it? What's the biggest shift you noticed? That's a great point. What was the exact moment when you realized that? I feel like I could listen to this story all day. What else stands out to you about it? That must have been an overwhelming moment. How did you process it all afterward? This really seems like a key moment in your life. How do you think it shaped your values? That's such a fascinating story. Have you ever experienced something similar since then? I can't stop thinking about this. How do you think it would have gone differently if things had changed just a little bit? That's a perspective I hadn't considered before. What led you to this way of thinking? You've given me so much to think about. What's one thing you wish more people understood about this? That's such an insightful thought. What's another experience that reinforced that idea for you? This is so inspiring. What's one message you'd share with someone going through something similar?